Well, let's talk about Ethekwini, and also several problems have emerged around the recent local government elections. Firstly, there was huge voter apathy. An unprecedented number of parties and independent candidates took part, saying that the big parties couldn't get the job done. An unprecedented 66 hung municipalities, suggesting that people have lost trust indeed in mainstream parties. Several attempts to try and form workable coalitions have already fallen apart. In Ethekwini, we've been following there, the ANC was in danger of losing control after agreeing with the IFP to vote together, and then the two parties fell out. But the ANC has managed to take that municipality with the help of smaller parties. Let's talk to independent consultant Amos Goliath now. Mr. Goliath, thank you for being with us. Are you surprised by what happened in Ethekwini? We're talking about coalition agreements. We saw the ANC and the IFP agree on how they would work in KwaZulu-Natal, and that disintegrated very quickly. We'll talk about Gauteng. But what do you think about the results announced tonight?
Thank you very much, Francis, and good evening to your viewers. No, I'm not surprised, because what has been happening in the last 2 days was an indication to us that we are facing very turbulent times in terms of political coalitions. I think we were surprised yesterday, and because of the surprises that came out yesterday from Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg and Tshwane, we should not be surprised about what happened today at Ethekwini municipality.
There was this hope that this time around there would be more workable coalitions. Maybe in Ethekwini there will be something more stable because the ANC does have the majority of seats there. But looking at Ekurhuleni, at Johannesburg, at Tshwane, the DA in charge, but supported by parties that they are in no agreement with at all, the EFF and Action SA. Does that seem stable to you? What do you expect to come out of those?
As I stated in my opinion piece, Francis, 14 days is not sufficient time for political parties to develop stable coalitions. And we will have to revisit the time frames that we give to parties in order for them to negotiate and agree on stable coalitions. For as long as we have, 14 days is simply not enough. And therefore, what we have seen is more horse trading than anything else.
Yeah, and people had to get into their corners at the last moment. Action SA, the leader, Herman Mashaba, I think has admitted that he was phoning the EFF at the final hour saying, let's support the DA so the ANC doesn't get in. So you think there could be very different outcomes if the politicians had more time just to work this out?
Absolutely. What happened in Johannesburg and Ethekwini and in Tshwane is what happened now. It replicated itself now in Ethekwini. It's just that the outcome was different in Ethekwini because there's not simply enough time for people to sit around the table and have meaningful discussions, agree on certain principles that will govern coalitions. And for as long as we do them in haste, we can expect this type of outcomes, very unpredicted outcomes and very unstable, because given the manner in which these coalitions were put together, I foresee that some of them will not last very long.
Yeah, so why aren't the politicians changing this timeline in law?
Well, I think politicians will now have to consider it seriously to change this. I think initially it was never envisaged that we will have a situation where so many parties have to be engaged in the formation of coalitions. And I think it's one of the issues that Parliament will have to consider. You have, in many European countries, you have governments running for long periods after the elections when parties have not been able to form coalitions, though government is still stable. And I don't think it's impossible for us to do it in our country, to give political parties more time to form coalitions, because it's not always possible for them to predetermine what the outcomes of the elections would be and play off the different scenarios should they get whichever majority or minority or a number of votes that they might cast in the elections. So I think it is something that they need to consider seriously, to give more time to political parties to engage one another, so as to ensure that the voters get what they want, because the voters deliberately voted in the fashion that they have voted in the past elections, because they don't trust the majority parties any longer with running municipalities on their own. So to give effect to that, Parliament will have to consider giving no time to political parties to consider coalitions, to engage even the communities in the type of coalitions that communities would want to see, for us to be able to have meaningful coalitions. But I think coalitions is the future, at least the immediate future for South Africa. And we might as well start putting things in processes in place and structures in place to accommodate coalitions, because it's not going to change in the near future.
Yeah. Well, there were some ideas this time around. SALGA, the Local Government Association, said it would come up with a framework for agreements because last time a lot of people got into coalition with no sort of agreement in place. Has that all come to naught? Because now we have the EFF and Action SA supporting the DA with absolutely no coalition agreement. Yeah, it could be even worse than last time.
As I said, Francis, there was not sufficient time for coalition agreements, proper agreements. But SALGA has developed this framework. I'm just not sure whether SALGA has had sufficient time to canvass it with the different political parties, because SALGA cannot impose it to political parties, but they can canvass it with political parties and see whether political parties buy in, because they are quite extensive, these guidelines that SALGA is proposing. And they will have to engage different political parties, and parties will probably only start applying these in subsequent local government elections.
Yeah, I think those only came through basically as the local government elections were being announced, the winners were being announced, so maybe, yes, only in time. That'll bear fruit. Thank you very much for your analysis, independent consultant Amos Goliath.